You commissioned this report. You didn't commission it in a proactive manner, isn't that right?
I don't understand the question.
Did you commission this report because you felt there were serious questions about the funding?
No, well, there were serious questions asked, and I felt that it would be useful to me to have an external view on those questions.
Okay. So your external review wrote from the service provider being very unhappy and coming to the Public Accounts Committee and saying, look, we were under-resourced, the figures being given are not accurate. I'm paraphrasing what was said, but your action came from the service provider coming forward and say we're most unhappy with what's been said. Is that right?
The sequence of events specifically.
Is that right? Are you disagreeing with me?
I'm not disagreeing with you, but
okay.
You're not complete.
What have I left out?
You've left out the fact that I went to meet with the service providers, and it was in the course of that discussion that I suggested that we'd use an independent external review as part of my consideration.
Very good.
I became aware from the discussion of the nature of their concerns, and I felt that was the best approach.
I hear that. But it came from them as a result of their concerns. You sat with them. You suggested an independent review, and that's where it went.
Yes.
You had complete control over the terms of reference. They had no input.
I can't recall whether they were shared with them first or not, but yes, as the Commissioner, I had control over the terms of reference. So you had complete control of the terms of reference, you set the terms of reference. Okay. Now, in relation to that, notwithstanding that, I'm calling them the service provider rather than whistleblower service provider, they engaged with this process. They confirmed that they were happy enough with the draft report up to May of this year. No knowledge of that.
I think it was sent to you. The document we got, the letter that we got, is that right, Chair? Was sent to the head. So
I know what they've said to the committee, and I know what's in the letter, but I don't know what happened in May.
No, listen to me now. That's not what you said. This was sent to you. Their letter was sent to you, where they set out their concerns, and they set out clearly that they saw a draft report in May, and they were happy enough with that draft report. If the word "happy" is appropriate, but they raised no issue in May. Is that right? You're aware of that?
That's what their letter says.
Good, great. Now, after that, the draft report is changed. After May, the draft report is changed, and they've no.
The draft report wasn't changed. A subsequent report, a further draft, was generated. The original draft, I presume, remains.
We're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We're going to answer questions. A draft report done in May. The service provider says, "Okay." They talk with delight and they say, OK, that's OK. That report is not the final report. They're not consulted. It's just difficult, Chair. Now.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
The Deputy wants one meeting.
They're not consulted, Mr. O'Brien, after that, but the Health Executive are consulted. Isn't that right?
I don't know the answer to that.
You better know the answers. You're here to answer questions. You're commissioned. Mr. O'Brien, let me finish. You commissioned an independent.
You've already asked me one question which you haven't allowed me to answer.
What? Answer it, please. Okay.
The answer is that I only am in possession of the final report. I was not privy to the internal processes of Deloitte, and I can't answer things that aren't within my knowledge.
So we're going to find out from the processes what happened after that. You don't know if after May that the service provider, if they were contacted again or not.
What I can tell you is that I shared the letter from the service provider with the reviewers, and their response is what I've read into the record.
And on the record, there'll be no obstacle put in the way of Deloitte furnishing us with the draft report that we're all talking about.
Deloitte will have their own considerations.
No, listen to my question. You will put no obstacle in the way of Deloitte.
I think I've already answered this question.
I just want to clarify.
Times.
Lots of things have been said over many years. Now, in relation to this has been very ably gone into by Deputy Connolly in relation to your conclusion. Consequently, in your letter on the 26th of September, dear Mr. Lenhen, and at the bottom, consequently, now you're speaking directly about Deloitte report, and down at the bottom, consequently, the service provider was not treated either unfairly or disproportionately when compared to other similarly funded organisations. You're standing over that today.
I am.
Good. All right. That's clear. That's clear. Good that it's clear. Not good that I agreed with you. Now, there was a case. How did the High Court case arise? It was taken by?
I need to choose my words carefully.
No,
No, I absolutely do.
There's nothing hanging on this in relation. I simply want to know who brought the case.
Chair, there are ways in which one can and can't refer to the plaintiff in this case, and I just want a moment to make sure I refer correctly. The person commonly referred to as Grace is the plaintiff in a case that was taken
in relation to this matter, which resulted in the High Court settlement.
Good. A case was taken on that person's behalf, and we're not going into any of that. But as part of the settlement, a figure in or around 600,000 was allocated as part of an overall package for her care in the previous years to pay for the care that she had received. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Good. So, are you seriously telling the Public Accounts Committee today that the Health Executive provided sufficient funding for the care of Grace in that service provider from 2009 onwards, and that you then magnanimously gave 600,000 on top of that, in addition to providing for her? Is that what you're telling us?
No, I don't believe I've told you that at all.
Okay. So are you accepting that you did not, the Health Executive did not provide sufficient funding for this service provider for the very special case, very special person that they had under their care?
I need to give a slightly extensive answer to that. Will I be permitted to do so, Chair?
Because it's a High Court issue. You just want to be clear, because I'm a little bit confused.
Okay, that's okay, Chair. I'll make it very simple.
Yeah.
Wait a second. The service provider takes over the case of this special person. Subsequently, there's an allocation retrospectively for her care. I read from that, as any person listening or watching would read from that, that was because not sufficient funding had been provided for her care from the Health Executive to the service provider. Do you accept now that not sufficient money was provided for her care?
I deal with this.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so, but I need to be allowed time to do so fully and correctly. The issue of the ongoing historical funding of any service provider is not the same thing as the approach we would take to the settlement of a case taken by an individual plaintiff. And it's important to stress that this case was not taken by the service provider, but taken by the plaintiff. And again, at this committee in 16, I indicated that in relation to those persons who had been harmed and were the subject of the Divine review, the executive, the HSE, would take a particularly positive approach to ensuring that appropriate restitution compensation was paid for the failings in care and the consequences of failings in care in the South East, related not just to Grace but to a number of people. Consequently, the approach to this case was not a hostile defensive approach, but working with the State Claims Agency was one which sought to put to rights all of the issues regarding the deficiencies in the care that had led to the harm suffered by this person. And consequently, it was right that the person, would be provided with restitution, which was also compensating them for the cost of the care that they had received. That's one answer.
Mr. Sorry now. Yeah. This has been explained many times by Mr. O'Brien. I'm under no illusion more than any other person in relation to a case, who took it, and the settlement. I'm specifically talking about the piece of the settlement that paid for to the service provider who didn't take the case.
Perhaps if I get to answer the balance of the question.
No.
I'm sorry, but if I'm not allowed to answer questions, there is no point being here.
Mr. O'Brien can take as long as he wants to answer the question, but I need to answer the question.
Yeah. You've already asked the question.
Did not.
Through the Chair.
Through the Chair. If leaving out what Mr. O'Brien has said, and I'm not going into it, I'm taking one specific part of that settlement that went to the care provider, the service provider. Yeah. I'm asking him, and what I'm reading from his answer is no, we were not acknowledging that that was because we underfunded the service. That's because we decided to take a particular review of a case. And I'm putting it to him that clearly it's an acknowledgement that it was an underfunding of the service, because they were not like any other service. They had a very special person in their care that needed very special attention at a high cost. So my specific question, and I'll finish it on it, and I also want the cost of delight again, please, I forget the cost of it. Is that not a clear acknowledgement that they had been underfunded? They had been left to care for Grace without proper funding from the Health Executive, and that's why you gave that portion in the settlement.
Okay, in relation to the service provider.
Which was the part of the answer I was intending to go on to, Chairman.
Yeah. Can I just say, and I understand what the Deputy is saying, there's a lot of people in the Public Accounts Committee and people who've watched it closely understand the details of the High Court and separating the Grace case from the service provider and who took the case. But I think the people watching don't know the details. So that's why I'm just allowing a bit more context, not for our benefit. We understand
you can
the
take
people watching, and it's not out of your time.
Chair, no, it's very...
The public, we're here in the public accounts. There's actually people watching this. And
what's relevant for us is the section in relation. That's my question, and I don't want it hidden behind something else.
No, he will answer the question. But for the people who watch the Public Accounts Committee, it's important to get a little bit of background to understand the specifics that we're familiar with, that the public might know. He will answer the question. He's been given a bit of background for the benefit of the viewers and the public who don't know the details, but he's going to give the specific answer to the specific question, guaranteed.
Okay. So the service provider in question provides a number of services to lots of clients, all of whom have particular and specialist needs, including this client. Okay? This is the nature of this service provider. In the period in question, it would not have been the norm, going back to 2009, for the fully encapsulated costs of each individual being cared for to be provided in a separate account. The organisation, like most Section 39 organisations, was funded broadly globally, but also with some restricted funds and some earmarked funds for a range of services that were provided under a service arrangement, similar to some of the discussions we'll be having later. In that period, taking account of the financial position of the service provider was being funded at a level which was sustainable for the service provider. So there are two separate things here. The decisions at the time were in a particular context. Was the service provider being underfunded? Were they being forced into deficit? What was the overall financial position? The types of decisions that are being made are made in that context all of the time. In this particular case, it is possible to calculate the total cost of care that was provided with the benefit of the knowledge of the Devine report, in the context of a High Court case, in the context of the position that I said we would take. That settlement was agreed. Now, that does not amount to a statement that in the round the service provider was being underfunded.
That's some subtle difference.
There's no difference. I won't take the time of my colleagues, but I really find that reply totally evasive. I'd go so far as to say shocking in its deliberate evasiveness. I leave it at that. I leave it to my colleagues.
I've answered the question.
Yeah, fine. Now, and it goes with